Hello, and welcome to Lab 6, Bone Tissue and Joints. We went through bone tissue if you listen to the Chapter 6 lecture. We're going to go through it again a little bit here and what you need to know off of this. So here is our bone. Our bones are made up of several osteons. These osteons are those circular types of concentric rows here. Each of these osteons are going to have these lamellae. These specific lamellae are each of these concentric circles is considered a lamellae. In the middle of each osteon is where we're going to have, sorry, I was trying to see where it was labeled somewhere, but I don't see it. I'm just going to draw a line off of it here. The central canal. In that central canal, we usually have a nerve, artery, and a vein. So our bones are very vascularized. There's lots of nutrients going to our bones. That's why if you've ever broken a bone, it swells up a lot because there's a lot of blood vessels in there. Compact bone, which is what we're looking at here, is made up of all those different osteons. Spongy bone that you can see in the middle, this spongy bone is made up of trabeculae. So spongy bone literally looks like a sponge. That is kind of the best way to name that, spongy bone. Okay, if we look, we see all of these little circles here. Every one of those little circles is an osteocyte. Osteocytes, remember, that are the cells that are going to maintain the bone. The osteocytes sit in a lacunae. We have several canaliculi, these little canals that go through here. These canals are where our osteocytes that have these little processes that come out, this is where they communicate with each other, and this is also where they get rid of waste products, is through these little canals. Well, these canaliculi specifically. There's one more. We have perforating canals. A perforating canal is where these, going through the middle of an osteon, blood vessels, one blood vessel connects to another blood vessel. These are through those perforating canals. And that is everything on our bone. Here's a picture of our spongy bone. In that spongy bone, we have all of these trabeculae. Again, all those trabeculae are just all those pieces together that make what looks like a sponge. Best way to put it. Spongy bone really does look like a sponge. So let's go through some of our joints. I know this joint specifically is not on our lab sheet, but I'd like to go through it in a little bit of detail. We have this temporomandibular joint. All of our joints, or most of our joints, are named for where they're at. Temporomandibular. It's between the temporal bone and the mandible. This is a hinge and a plane joint. Hinge has two directions. Plane can move in the opposite direction from a hinge. So some of the different movements that your jaw, that mandible, can do is that depression, elevation, protraction, so you can stick your chin out and back in. Lateral displacement lets you go side to side, and then there's a little bit of rotation in there. So here is this temporomandibular joint. We've got some different ligaments that are going to kind of come through and cover up this mandible that's coming in contact with this temporal bone on the other side. Here we can kind of see how this mandible, how we've got so many different ligaments. We've got this capsule around this joint, got several ligaments around. We even have this articular disc in the middle that's helping to cushion your jaw, cushion that joint, that area. So let's go to that shoulder joint. This is one that you need to know. The shoulder joint is known as the glenohumeral or the glenohumeral joint because it's between that glenoid fossa and that head of that humerus, that glenohumeral. The two ligaments that you need to know, these are named for where they start and where they end. So we've got the acromioclavicular, is not technically listed here. Acromioclavicular ligament. And this not even coracohumeral, coracoclavicular ligament. So these are two ligaments that are actually going to be found across the top between that clavicle and that part of the scapula. So that coracoclavicular ligament is technically made up of this ligament here with this ligament here. These two that are helping to hold this coracoid process of that scapula to that clavicle over here. The other one that we had was that acromioclavicular ligament. That is this ligament right here. These two sets of ligaments are the ligaments that are helping to hold your clavicle and your scapula together within that shoulder girdle. Those are the only two ligaments off of all of this that you need to know on that shoulder girdle. If you have somebody with a separated shoulder, those coracoclavicular ligaments and that acromioclavicular ligament is going to be torn. That's where a separated shoulder is going to come into play. Let's look at that hip joint. Your hip joint is known as a ball and socket joint, just technically like that shoulder joint up here was. This is considered a ball and socket joint. So is that hip joint. It is where that femur comes in contact with that acetabulum. So let's look at this joint. The ligaments that you need to know. Again, these are labeled for where they start and where they end. We have the pubofemoral ligament. So it's from this pubic bone down to the femur. That's that pubofemoral ligament. Then we have our iliofemoral ligament. So it's going from that top part, that ilium, down to that femur. Then the other ligament that we have to look at the back to see is that ischiofemoral ligament. So it goes from that ischium in the back to that femur. You can see part of that iliofemoral up at the top. You're not going to see that pubofemoral just because that's only from the front. Those are the only ligaments that you need to know off of this specific hip joint. The knee. The knee joint is the most complicated joint in the body. Your knee joint is made up of a lot of different parts. Your knee joint is technically 3 different joints in one area. So we have the tibiofemoral on the lateral side, the tibiofemoral on the medial side, and that patellofemoral, which is found between the patella and the femur. There's a lot of different ligaments here. I'm going to go through and point them out. There's different bursa. Bursa are like little synovial, they're not joints, they're synovial little pockets of fluid with that synovial capsule around it that's helping to kind of cushion out that specific joint. So let's look at our knee joint here. Our knee joint, let's start with our cruciate. We have our anterior cruciate ligament. This anterior cruciate ligament is going to start at the front of that tibia, and it's going to attach to the posterior port of that femur. The posterior cruciate ligament starts in the back of that tibia, and it comes to the front of that femur. These two ligaments prevent that femur from traveling too far forwards or too far backwards on top of that tibia. We have a medial meniscus and a lateral meniscus. These are a type of they are fibrocartilage. They are these kind of discs found in our knee cavity here that helps those condyles on that femur to fit on top of that tibia. Other things that we can see here, we have this fibular collateral ligament, also known as the lateral collateral ligament. Collateral means that it runs on the same side all the way down. So there's that fibular collateral ligament. And then we have our tibial collateral ligament or our medial collateral ligament, which runs along that medial or tibial side of that joint. So here we can see that anterior cruciate that starts on the front of that tibia. You can see that posterior cruciate ligament that starts on the back of that tibia. You can see that medial meniscus. The medial meniscus, if you notice, is a lot larger than that lateral meniscus. And then we have our lateral meniscus on the outside, which is on the same side as that fibula. That is smaller. From this view, you can also see that patellotibial, or also just known as that patellar ligament that attaches to that tibial tuberosity. So here you can see that patellotibial, also known as that patellar ligament. The patellar ligament is technically from below that kneecap, below that patella, down to that tibia. We've got this quadriceps tendon at the top. Whoops. That quadriceps tendon is from above, from those quadricep muscles, those muscles down to the patella. The patella, that kneecap, is where that changes its name. It goes from a tendon to a ligament. A tendon attaches a muscle to a bone. A ligament attaches a bone to a bone. That is the difference between the two. So here we can see this on a cadaver leg sliced right in half. Here again is that quadriceps tendon. We've got that patellar tendon. You can see that patella here. You can see that medial meniscus from this view. Here you can kind of see a lot of what's happening in the knee. You've got that tibial collateral ligament that's running along that tibial side. You have that fibular collateral ligament that's running along that fibular side. Then we've got our quadriceps tendon up at the top. And we have our patellar tendon below that patella. There's a lot that's helping to hold this knee joint in place. So you can see it from behind. You can see that fibular collateral. You can see that tibial collateral. There's a lot going on here. Here you see that quadriceps tendon, that patellar ligament. You can see that lateral meniscus. Here's that, can't see that color. Medial meniscus. You can see that patellar, or that tibial collateral ligament, that fibular collateral ligament. So there's a lot going on in here. Here you can see it from the back. So we have that posterior cruciate ligament here. You can see that anterior cruciate ligament here. We've got that fibular collateral along this side. We've got that tibial collateral along the other side. So there's a lot happening. Now we have all the different movements. These are different muscle actions. We go through them in the joints section. There's pictures in the joints chapter of how all of these work. So flexion is just decreasing that angle. So when you take your arm straight to bent, that's flexion. Bending down to touch your toes, that's flexion. Extension, straightening your arm back out, standing back up, that's extension. Lateral flexion is just moving your trunk from side to side, bending your spine from side to side. Abduction is moving away, your arm away from midline, your leg away from midline, your fingers, separating all your fingers apart. That's also abduction. Adduction, your arm is up over your head, bringing it back down to your middle. Taking your fingers that are all separated, bringing them back together, that's adduction. Circumduction is making that circle. Exactly what it says. Dorsiflexion is of your foot only. Dorsiflexion is flexing your toes up towards your shin. It's named dorsiflexion because it is thought that it looks like the dorsal fin of a shark. Plantar flexion is pointing your toes down towards the floor. Also standing up on your toes. That's also plantar flexion. Supination is when your palm of your hand is facing up or towards the front if your arm is straight at your side. Pronation is when the palm of your hand faces down or the palm of your hand faces back. My little tricks to remember those. Supination has the word up in it, so your palm is up. Pronation has the word on in it, so your on the table. Palm of your hand is on the table. Opposition is taking your fingers and touching it to your thumb. That is where opposition will come into play. Inversion is taking your foot only and moving it towards midline. Eversion is that foot moving away from that midline. Okay, I've attached pictures of models. These are the models that I will use to tag for the practical for this. So you can see that acromioclavicular ligament from this view. Here you can see that coracoclavicular ligament, acromioclavicular ligament. So they're labeled in here. Here's just another view that that's coracohumeral, coracoacromial. That's not what I want either, is it? Coracoclavicular. Here's acromioclavicular. Sorry. Coraco. It's here. It's not labeled. That is that coracoclavicular that I was looking all over for. The one I just drew in purple. Here's that hip joint, that pubofemoral, iliofemoral, ischiofemoral, and then that knee joint, that quadriceps tendon, that patellar ligament. You see that patella in there. You see the medial meniscus, the lateral meniscus, that fibular collateral, that tibial collateral. You can see that anterior cruciate, that posterior cruciate, and then you just see it from the back. So I'm going to use the pictures from the models to tag for the practical, but I showed you on pictures from your textbook lab manual as well. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and thank you very much for listening.